The frontier town of Red Creek had seen its share of dangerous men. There were outlaws who could shoot a coin from 20 paces, ranch hands who could break a man's jaw with one punch, and bounty hunters who walked into saloons carrying enough weapons to start a small war. But none of them frightened the people of Red Creek quite like Braca. Braca was an orc girl in a town where almost everyone was human. She stood taller than most men, with broad shoulders, powerful arms, dark green skin, and long black hair that fell over one side of her face. Her golden eyes seemed to burn whenever someone insulted her. And people insulted her often. They called her wild. They called her difficult. They called her dangerous. But the name that followed her everywhere was the one she hated most. Too much strength. Too much temper. Too much pride. Too much independence. Every man who had ever tried to court Braca had eventually walked away with his pride wounded. Some had tried to impress her by challenging her to arm wrestling. Others had boasted about their hunting skills or claimed they could protect her. Braca had defeated every one of them. One man had challenged her to lift a heavy wagon wheel. She lifted the entire wagon. Another had claimed he could wrestle her to the ground. Braca had pinned him in less than 10 seconds. After that, the men of Red Creek learned to keep their distance. Braca pretended not to care. She walked through town with her head held high, carrying heavy sacks that 2 men would struggle to lift. She repaired her own fences, chopped her own firewood, and handled every problem that came to her door. She didn't need a husband. She didn't need a protector. At least, that was what she told herself. The truth was more complicated. Braca had spent most of her life learning that people were comfortable with her strength only when they could benefit from it. When they needed a fence repaired, they called her. When a horse escaped, they asked her to catch it. When trouble came, they expected her to stand at the front. But when it came to friendship or love, suddenly her strength became a problem. Men admired her from a distance. Women whispered about her. Children stared at her. Nobody bothered to ask what she wanted. Then, one hot afternoon, a stranger rode into Red Creek. His name was Elias. He was a human Apache with a quiet manner and watchful eyes. He wore a weathered hat, a dark leather vest, and carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had survived more dangerous places than Red Creek. Elias didn't stare at Braca. That was the first thing she noticed. He didn't look frightened either. That was the second. Later that evening, trouble began inside the town saloon. A drunken ranch hand insulted Braca after she accidentally bumped into his table. When he grabbed her arm, Braca's expression changed. The entire saloon went silent. She pulled free. The wooden table beside her cracked beneath her fist. The ranch hand stumbled backward. Braca took one step toward him. Then Elias spoke. "That's enough." Braca slowly turned. The stranger was standing near the doorway. She narrowed her golden eyes. "Are you talking to me?" Elias calmly nodded. Braca stepped closer. The room became completely silent. Everyone expected Elias to apologize. Instead, he looked at her without fear and said quietly, "Sit down. Let me show you." Braca froze. No man had ever spoken to her like that. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she actually wanted to know what he meant. Here is part 2, continuing directly from part 1 with the same cinematic Wild West fantasy romance style. Writing, variant equals, document ID equals, 31684, hashtag part 2, the lesson begins for several long seconds. Braca simply stared at Elias. The entire saloon seemed to be holding its breath. The drunken ranch hand who had grabbed her arm had already stumbled away, suddenly more interested in his drink than in continuing the confrontation. But Braca wasn't looking at him anymore. Her golden eyes were fixed on the stranger standing near the doorway. "Excuse me?" she asked. Elias didn't move. "You heard me." A few men at the nearby tables exchanged nervous glances. One of them whispered, "That fool doesn't know who he's talking to." Braca heard him. So did Elias. She stepped closer. "Most men who speak to me like that don't get a second chance." Elias looked down at her massive frame and then back into her eyes. "Then I suppose I should make the first chance count." A few people laughed nervously. Braca didn't. She had expected fear. She had expected arrogance. Instead, Elias seemed almost amused. That irritated her more than anything. "Outside," Braca said. Elias raised an eyebrow. "You want to fight?" "No," Braca cracked her knuckles. "I want to teach you a lesson." Elias smiled faintly. "That's what I was about to say." The crowd followed them outside. By sunset, nearly half the town had gathered around the dusty clearing behind the saloon. Everyone wanted to see the same thing. The stranger versus Braca. The orc girl nobody could handle. Braca stood in the center of the clearing, stretching her shoulders. Elias removed his hat and placed it on a wooden post. "You can still walk away," Braca told him. "I could." "Then why aren't you?" "Because you haven't learned anything yet." Her eyes narrowed. "Learned what?" Elias pointed toward a flat stone near the edge of the clearing. "Sit down." The crowd burst into laughter. Braca's face went completely still. Elias waited. Finally, she walked toward the stone. For one terrifying moment, everyone thought she was going to attack him. Instead, "Braca Saturday, good," Elias said. She glared at him. "Now tell me why you're angry." That question caught her completely off guard. Braca looked around at the watching townspeople. "I'm not angry." Elias nodded toward the cracked table visible through the saloon's open doors. "Your fist disagrees." A few people laughed. Braca immediately stood. Elias didn't flinch. "Sit." This time, something strange happened. Braca listened. She sat down again. Elias crouched several feet away. "You think strength means never backing down," he said. "You think if someone challenges you, you have to prove you're stronger." Braca's jaw tightened. "And what's wrong with that?" "Nothing." Elias picked up a small stone. "But if you spend your whole life proving you're strong, you'll never discover how strong you really are." Braca frowned. Elias tossed the stone into the air and caught it. "Strength isn't only about how hard you can hit." He pointed toward the surrounding wilderness. "It's knowing when to wait." Then he pointed at Braca. "Knowing when to move." He tossed the stone again. "And knowing when the person standing against you is trying to make you angry because anger makes you careless." Braca stared at him. For the first time, she understood. The ranch hand inside the saloon had wanted her to lose control. And she had almost given him exactly what he wanted. Elias stood. "Tomorrow morning. Sunrise." Braca crossed her arms. "Why would I come?" "Because you're curious." "I am not." Elias picked up his hat. "Then don't come." He turned and walked away. Braca watched him disappear down the dusty street. She hated that he was right. She hated even more that she wanted to know what else he could teach her. The next morning, just before sunrise, Elias arrived at the abandoned training ground outside town. He expected to wait alone. But when the first light appeared over the distant mountains, Braca was already there. Standing beside the old wooden fence. Waiting. Elias smiled. Braca pointed at him. "Don't say it." "Say what?" "That you're surprised." "I wasn't going to." "You were." Elias turned toward the training ground. "Then show me what you've got." Braca smiled for the first time. And Elias immediately realized that teaching Braca patience was going to be much harder than he Had imagined. Here is part 3, continuing the story with rising tension, romance, and the arrival of a dangerous threat. Writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 92743, hashtag part 3, the town turns against them for the next several days. Braca met Elias at sunrise. At first, she told herself she was only going because she wanted to prove that the human Apache had nothing left to teach her. But every morning, she arrived before him. And every morning, Elias found another lesson waiting. He taught her to listen to the wind before entering unfamiliar territory. He showed her how to notice footprints hidden beneath dust and how to recognize when someone was watching from a distance. Most importantly, he taught her patience. Braca hated patience. She preferred action. If a problem appeared, she solved it with her fists. If someone insulted her, she confronted them. If someone challenged her, she accepted. But Elias kept forcing her to stop. Wait, he would say. Think. Watch. Sometimes they would sit in silence for nearly an hour. Braca would become so frustrated that she wanted to throw a rock at him. But slowly, something changed. She began noticing things she had never paid attention to before. The movement of birds in the trees. The direction of the wind. The sound of distant horses. And, strangely enough, she began noticing Elias. She noticed how his expression changed when he was amused. How he always looked toward the horizon before answering difficult questions. How he never spoke more than necessary. And how, whenever she became angry, he never looked afraid. He simply waited for her anger to pass. That made Braca uncomfortable. She had spent years believing that people only respected her because they feared her. Elias seemed to respect her for an entirely different reason. He believed she was capable of controlling herself. That realization slowly began to matter to her. Unfortunately, the people of Red Creek noticed the change too. Rumors began spreading. Braca heard them one afternoon while walking through town. She spends every morning with that Apache. Maybe he's the only man foolish enough to handle her. Handle her? A third voice laughed. Give it time. She'll scare him away too. Braca stopped walking. Her hands tightened into fists. She turned toward the men sitting outside the general store. Elias, who had been walking beside her, immediately noticed. Don't, he said. Braca looked at him. They're talking about me. I know. They think they know me. I know. Then why aren't you doing anything? Elias calmly looked at the men. Because they're trying to make you angry. Braca's eyes narrowed. And you're going to disappoint them. She stared at him. Then, surprisingly, Braca smiled. She walked past the men without saying a word. The laughter behind her stopped. Elias followed. But neither of them noticed the stranger watching from the opposite side of the street. His name was Calder Vane. And he had been watching Braca for several days. Calder was a ruthless cattle thief who had recently arrived in the territory with 6 armed men. He had heard rumors about Braca's strength and believed she could be useful. He wanted her land. More importantly, he wanted her reputation. Calder knew that if he could provoke Braca into attacking him publicly, the townspeople would turn against her. Then he could make himself look like the victim. 3 days later, Calder put his plan into motion. He walked into the saloon while Braca was sitting alone at a corner table. Elias was outside speaking with the blacksmith. Calder approached Braca with a cruel smile. Well, he said, if it isn't Red Creek's famous monster. Braca slowly raised her eyes. Walk away. Calder laughed. I heard you were strong. Braca ignored him. Calder leaned closer. But I didn't hear you were afraid. The room went silent. Braca's jaw tightened. Calder smiled. There it was. The anger. The reaction he wanted. He reached toward the table and knocked her cup onto the floor. The wooden cup shattered. Braca stood. Every person in the saloon froze. Calder took one step backward. "Go ahead," he whispered. Braca's fists clenched. For 1 second, she was ready to hit him. Then she remembered Elias. "You don't have to prove what everyone already knows." She slowly opened her hand. Calder's smile disappeared. Braca leaned toward him. "You came here hoping I'd lose control." Calder blinked. Braca stepped around him. "But you're going to have to find another way to entertain yourself." The entire saloon stared. Calder's face turned red. He had failed. Braca walked outside. Elias was waiting near the hitching post. He had seen everything. Braca stopped in front of him. "Well?" Elias smiled. "Well, what? You're supposed to tell me I did well." "I don't think you need me to." Braca tried to hide her smile. But then Elias's expression changed. He looked past her toward the distant hills. "What is it?" Braca asked. Elias didn't answer immediately. In the distance, 6 riders were moving slowly across the ridge. Calder's men. And they weren't riding toward town. They were heading toward Braca's homestead. Elias's eyes hardened. "You're home." Braca immediately turned. Her expression changed. All the patience Elias had taught her disappeared beneath something much older. Protectiveness. She started walking toward her horse. Elias caught her arm. "Braca." She looked back. "Let go. Listen to me. They're going to my land. And that's exactly what they want you to do." Braca stopped. Elias stepped closer. "This isn't about fighting them." "Then what is it about?" Elias looked toward the distant riders. "It's about making them regret choosing the wrong woman." Braca's golden eyes narrowed. For the first time, Elias saw something different in her expression. Not anger. Not rage. Determination. Braca mounted her horse. Elias climbed onto his own. Together, they rode toward the homestead. Neither of them knew that before sunset, the lesson Elias had been teaching Braca would face its greatest test. Because this time, Braca wasn't fighting for her pride. She was fighting for her home. And Elias was about to discover exactly what happened when the woman everyone called too much finally had something worth protecting. Here is part 4, where Braca and Elias face their first real battle together and their bond deepens. Writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 45217, hashtag part 4, when the real fight comes. Braca and Elias rode hard toward the homestead. The afternoon sun was already sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Dust rose beneath the horses' hooves as they raced across the open land. Braca could see smoke in the distance. Her stomach tightened. "My barn," she whispered. Elias looked ahead. 3 riders were circling the property while the others had already dismounted. Braca reached for the reins. "Faster." Elias caught her attention. "Wait." She turned sharply. "Wait. Look." Braca stared at the homestead. The riders were not attacking. They were waiting. A trap. Elias pointed toward the ridge behind them. 2 more men were hidden among the rocks. Braca's eyes narrowed. "They want us to charge straight in." "Exactly." She looked at him. "So what's the plan?" Elias studied the land. "You know this property better than anyone." Braca nodded. "There is an old creek behind the barn. Can we reach it without being seen?" "Yes." "Good." Elias looked directly at her. "You'll circle around the north side." Braca immediately shook her head. "No. I'll take the front." "That's what they're expecting." "I can handle them." "I know." His answer made her pause. Elias wasn't questioning her strength. He was trusting it. But if you attack from the front, he continued, they'll surround you. Braca frowned. Elias pointed toward the barn. I'll draw there. Attention. You come from behind. Braca crossed her arms. And if they surround you? Then you come rescue me. For the first time that afternoon, Braca almost smiled. You're enjoying this. Maybe a little. Braca shook her head. Human fool. Orc troublemaker. They separated. Elias rode toward the homestead alone. Almost immediately, Calder stepped from behind the barn. I knew you'd come, Calder called. Elias dismounted. I'm sure you did. Calder looked around. Where's the orc? Not here. Calder laughed. You think you can protect her? Elias calmly tied his horse to the fence. No, Calder frowned. Then what are you doing? Elias looked toward the barn. Giving her something to protect. Before Calder could understand, Elias moved. He grabbed a wooden post and threw it toward one of Calder's men. The man fell backward. A gunshot cracked through the air. Elias dove behind a water trough. Calder shouted. Find him. The men rushed forward. But they had made one mistake. They were looking at Elias. They weren't watching the creek. Braca emerged from the tall grass like a storm. The first outlaw barely had time to turn before she struck him with her shoulder. He flew across the yard and landed in a pile of hay. The second man raised his rifle. Braca kicked it from his hands. He stared at her. Monster. Braca grabbed him by the collar. No, she threw him aside. Just angry. Elias fired a warning shot into the ground. The remaining men scattered. Calder cursed. Get her. 3 men rushed Braca at once. This was exactly the kind of fight she had always loved. A fight where she could stop thinking. A fight where she could let her anger take control. Braca grabbed one man and threw him into another. Then she heard Elias's voice. Braca. She looked toward him. Left. She turned. A rifleman was aiming at her from behind the fence. Braca immediately dropped to the ground. The shot passed over her head. She rolled behind a barrel. Elias fired. The rifleman dropped his weapon and ran. Braca looked at Elias. He pointed toward the hill. 2 more. Braca didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward them. One man tried to block her path. She ducked beneath his swing and drove her shoulder into his chest. The man crashed into the dirt. The second outlaw ran. Braca chased him. Then she heard a gunshot. She stopped. Elias. He was standing near the barn. One hand pressed against his side. Blood was spreading across his shirt. Braca's eyes went wide. Elias. She ran toward him. Calder stepped from behind the barn. A pistol was aimed directly at Elias. Drop your weapon, Calder ordered. Braca froze. Elias looked at her. His face was pale, but his voice remained calm. Don't. Calder smiled. Looks like the great Braca finally found something she cares about. Braca's fists tightened. Her anger rose like fire. She wanted to tear Calder apart. She wanted to crush his bones. She wanted him to suffer for hurting Elias. And Calder knew it. He wanted her angry. He wanted her reckless. He wanted her to attack. But then Braca remembered Elias's lessons. Wait, watch, think, she looked around. Calder was holding the pistol with his right hand. His left foot was slightly forward. His attention was fixed entirely on her. Behind him was the barn. Beside him was an old wooden fence. And above him, the barn's pulley system. Braca slowly lowered her fists. Calder smiled. That's better. Braca looked at Elias. Their eyes met. For one brief second, neither spoke. Elias understood. Braca took one slow step forward. Then another. Calder raised the pistol. Stop. Braca stopped. You wanted me to lose control, she said. Calder's smile faded. But you made one mistake. What? Braca smiled. You thought I needed to be angry to defeat you. Then she moved. She grabbed the rope attached to the barn's pulley and yanked it with all her strength. A heavy wooden crate swung through the air. Calder turned. Too late. The crate struck his arm. His pistol flew into the dirt. Elias immediately kicked it away. Braca charged. Calder ran. She caught him before he reached the horses. Braca grabbed the back of his coat and lifted him off the ground. Calder struggled. Put me down. Braca raised him higher. You came to my home. She slammed him against the fence. You threatened my land. Another slam. You hurt him. Braca's fist pulled back. Calder closed his eyes. But Braca stopped. Her fist remained inches from his face. Elias's voice echoed in her mind. Strength isn't only about how hard you can hit. Braca slowly lowered her hand. Calder stared at her in disbelief. You're letting me live. Braca released him. No, she stepped back. I'm letting you live with the knowledge that I could have ended this differently. Calder fell to his knees. The remaining outlaws fled. Silence returned to the homestead. Braca immediately turned toward Elias. He was leaning against the barn. Blood still stained his shirt. She rushed to him. You're hurt. It's only a scratch. Don't lie to me. Braca carefully touched the wound. Elias winced. Her expression softened. For the first time, Braca's hands, which could bend iron and break timber, became incredibly gentle. I thought I lost you, she whispered. Elias looked at her. You didn't. Braca stared into his eyes. Something changed between them. The battle had been won. Calder was defeated. The homestead was safe. But neither Braca nor Elias could ignore what had happened. Braca had discovered something terrifying. She didn't just care about Elias. She cared about him enough to be afraid of losing him. And Elias had discovered something equally important. The woman everyone believed was impossible to control had finally learned the greatest lesson of all. She didn't need someone to control her. She needed someone she could trust. As the sun disappeared beyond the mountains, Braca helped Elias inside the house. Neither of them noticed the small smile that appeared on Braca's face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't walking alone. And somewhere in the quiet space between them, something far more powerful than strength had begun to grow. Here is part 5, continuing the emotional journey as Braca finally reveals the wound behind her fierce independence and Elias shows her what real love means. Writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 68143, hashtag part 5, the truth behind, too much, the night after the battle was strangely quiet. For the first time in years, Braca's homestead felt peaceful. The horses were safely secured in the stable. The broken fence had been temporarily repaired. Calder Vane and his remaining men were gone, driven away from the property with their pride shattered and their plans destroyed. But Braca couldn't sleep. She sat alone on the front porch, staring at the dark mountains in the distance. Inside the house, Elias was asleep. Or at least, Braca hoped he was. The bullet had only grazed his side, but every time she remembered seeing blood on his shirt, her chest tightened. She had almost lost him. The thought frightened her more than any outlaw ever had. Braca looked down at her hands. These were the hands people feared. The hands that could lift wagons, break doors, knock grown men into the dirt. Yet tonight, they felt useless. She had spent her entire life believing strength could protect her from everything. But one bullet had reminded her that strength couldn't protect the people she cared about. The porch door opened behind her. Braca didn't turn. "You should be sleeping," Elias said. "So should you." Elias walked out and sat beside her. For several moments, neither spoke. The moon hung above the mountains. Finally, Elias looked at her. "You're blaming yourself." Braca's eyes narrowed. "For what? For what happened today?" She looked away. "I should have seen the ambush sooner. You weren't the one who got shot. You were. And I'm still alive." Braca's jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean it wasn't my fault." Elias studied her. "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Take responsibility for everything." Braca immediately stood. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Elias's voice remained calm. "You think you have to carry everything yourself." Braca turned toward him. "Because someone has to." Elias stood too. "Why?" "Because nobody else will." The words came out sharper than she intended. Silence followed. Elias didn't interrupt. Braca looked away. For a moment, she seemed ready to leave. But then something inside her broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for the truth to finally escape. "When I was young," she said quietly, "my family moved from one settlement to another." Elias listened. "We were never welcome anywhere." Braca stared at the dark horizon. "Humans thought we were monsters. Orcs thought I was too soft because I didn't enjoy fighting." Her voice became quieter. "So I learned to become strong." She looked down at her hands. "Very strong." Elias said nothing. Braca continued. "Every time someone tried to hurt me, I fought back harder. Every time someone tried to make me feel small, I made myself bigger." A bitter smile crossed her face. "And eventually, it worked." Elias watched her carefully. "People stopped trying to hurt you." "Yes." Braca's smile disappeared. "They also stopped trying to know me." That sentence hung between them. Elias finally understood. The strength everyone admired had begun as a shield. Braca hadn't become powerful because she wanted to intimidate people. She had become powerful because she was terrified of being powerless again. "I've heard what they say," she whispered. "About me?" Elias nodded. "They say no man can handle me." Braca laughed bitterly. "They say I'm too loud. Too stubborn. Too angry. Too strong." She turned toward him. "Too much." Her golden eyes were suddenly vulnerable. "And maybe they're right." Elias stepped closer. "No," Braca looked at him. "You don't know that." "I do." "How?" "Because I know the difference between someone who is too much and someone who has been forced to survive too much." Braca froze. Elias continued. "You were never too much, Braca." Her eyes began to shine. "You were just surrounded by people who wanted you to become less." Braca looked away quickly. She didn't want him to see the tears gathering in her eyes. But Elias saw them anyway. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to tell her not to cry. He simply stood beside her. That was what made the difference. For once, someone wasn't trying to fix her. They were simply staying. Braca finally whispered, "Why?" Elias frowned. "Why what? Why don't you want me to be different?" Elias smiled. "Because I don't want a weaker Braca." She looked at him. "I don't want a quieter Braca." He stepped closer. I don't want a smaller Braca. Her breath caught. I want you. Braca stared at him. Exactly as you are. The words reached somewhere inside her that no one had ever touched. For years, Braca had believed love meant finding someone who could tolerate her. Someone strong enough to survive her temper. Someone brave enough to stand beside her. But Elias had shown her something different. Love wasn't about surviving someone. It was about seeing them. Really seeing them. The fierce orc woman. The stubborn fighter. The lonely girl who had spent her entire life pretending she needed nobody. Elias saw all of it. And he wasn't afraid. Braca slowly reached for his hand. Her fingers were enormous compared to his. Yet when their hands touched, she felt something she had never expected. Peace. Elias gently squeezed her hand. Braca looked down. Then she whispered, "When you first told me to sit down," Elias smiled. "I remember. I thought you were trying to control me." "I know. But you weren't." "No," Braca looked into his eyes. "You were asking me to trust you." Elias nodded. Braca took a slow breath. Then, for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to lean against someone else. She rested her head against Elias's shoulder. He didn't move. He simply let her stay there. The woman who had carried everything alone had finally discovered that strength didn't always mean standing by yourself. Sometimes strength meant having the courage to let someone stand beside you. And as the moonlight covered the quiet homestead, Braca finally understood the truth Elias had been trying to teach her from the beginning. She had never been too much. She had simply never met someone who was willing to see all of her. Until now, here is the final part 6, bringing Braca and Elias's story to a warm, emotional, and satisfying conclusion. Writing, variant equals, document ID equals, 21457, hashtag part 6, the woman no man could handle. The seasons changed slowly on the frontier. Winter gave way to spring, the frozen streams began to flow again, and wildflowers appeared across the hills surrounding Red Creek. But the biggest change wasn't in the land. It was in the people. For years, everyone in town had known Braca as the orc woman nobody could handle. Now, they knew her differently. They knew her as the woman who had stood against Calder Vane and his gang. They knew her as the woman who had protected her home without becoming the monster everyone expected her to be. And they knew something else. Braca wasn't alone anymore. Elias was still beside her. The two had become an unusual sight around Red Creek. Braca could often be seen carrying heavy sacks of grain while Elias walked beside her, calmly drinking coffee. Sometimes people joked that Elias was the only human foolish enough to marry an orc woman like Braca. Braca always pretended to be offended. But Elias knew better. She secretly enjoyed every word. One afternoon, Braca was repairing a section of fence when a young ranch hand approached. He was nervous. Very nervous. Braca looked up. "What do you want?" The young man swallowed. I need help with something." Braca raised an eyebrow. "With what?" "My horse." Braca stood. "What's wrong with it?" "He won't let anyone near him." Braca looked toward the stable. "Then bring him out." The young ranch hand hesitated. "Are you sure?" Braca stared at him. "Did you ask me if I was sure?" "No." "Then stop asking foolish questions." The young man quickly brought out the horse. The animal was wild-eyed and frightened. It pulled against the reins. The ranch hand tried to control it. The horse reared. Braca stepped forward. Everyone nearby froze. They expected her to grab the animal. Instead, Braca stopped several feet away. She remembered Elias's lessons. Wait. Watch. Think. The horse's ears moved. Braca studied its breathing. Then she slowly lowered herself to the ground. The young ranch hand stared. "What are you doing?" "Being patient." The horse gradually stopped fighting. Braca remained still. Minutes passed. Finally, the animal took one cautious step toward her. Then another. The young ranch hand looked amazed. Braca smiled. "You see." She slowly reached out her hand. The horse lowered its head. Braca gently touched its nose. The crowd watching from the street erupted into applause. Braca immediately stood. "It's just a horse." But everyone knew it wasn't. The woman who had once solved every problem with strength had learned to understand something far more powerful. Control. Patience. Trust. Across the street, Elias watched with a proud smile. Braca noticed him. She walked toward him. "What are you smiling at?" "Nothing." "You're smiling." "Maybe I'm proud." Braca crossed her arms. "Of what?" "You." Her expression softened. Before she could answer, Elias handed her a small wooden box. Braca stared at it. "What is that?" "Open it." She carefully opened the lid. Inside was a simple silver necklace. A small pendant hung from the chain. It was shaped like a mountain beneath a rising sun. Braca looked at it. "Why are you giving me this?" Elias shrugged. "Because I wanted you to have it." Braca's fingers closed around the pendant. She looked at him. "Is this a proposal?" Elias nearly choked. "What?" Braca smiled. "You heard me. No, you're giving me jewelry." "It's a necklace." "Jewelry." "Braca." She laughed. For a moment, the entire town seemed to disappear. There was only the two of them. Elias finally shook his head. "You are impossible." Braca stepped closer. "And yet you're still here." Elias smiled. "I'm still here." That was all she needed to hear. Months later, their home had grown into something neither of them had expected. The old homestead was no longer lonely. There were horses in the stable. Fresh vegetables in the garden. Firewood stacked beside the cabin. And laughter coming from the porch every evening. Braca and Elias never became a perfect couple. They argued. Often. Braca was stubborn. Elias was patient. Sometimes her stubbornness met his patience like a storm crashing into a mountain. But neither of them walked away. Because they had learned something important. Love wasn't about finding someone who never challenged you. It was about finding someone worth staying for. One evening, Braca returned from the forest carrying an enormous pile of firewood. She dropped it beside the cabin with a loud crash. Elias looked at the pile. Then he looked at her. "Braca." "What?" "You don't need that much firewood." "We might. We have enough for 3 winters. Then we're prepared." Elias laughed. Braca walked past him. "Stop laughing." "I'm not laughing." "You are." Elias followed her toward the porch. "Braca." She stopped. Elias pointed toward the chair beside him. "Sit down." Braca slowly turned. For 1 second, the old Braca returned. Her eyes narrowed. "Careful." Elias smiled. "Let me show you something." Braca stared at him. Then she remembered. The first day they met. The saloon. The angry ranch hand. The words that had changed everything. "Sit down. Let me show you, ****. Back then, she had thought Elias was trying to control her. Now she understood. He had been the first person to tell her that she didn't have to fight every battle. She didn't have to prove herself. She didn't have to carry everything alone. Braca walked toward him. Then she sat. Not because he told her to. Because she wanted to. Elias handed her a cup of coffee. Braca took it. They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. After a long silence, Braca leaned against his shoulder. Elias? Yes. You know what they call me now? Elias smiled. I've heard a few things. Braca looked toward the distant town. They don't call me the orc girl nobody can handle anymore. What do they call you? Braca thought for a moment. Then she smiled. The woman who saved Red Creek. Elias nodded. That sounds better. Braca looked at him. Much better. Elias reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined. Braca looked down at their hands and smiled. For years, she had believed that being loved meant becoming smaller. Quieter. Softer. Less frightening. But Elias had never asked her to become less. He had simply shown her how to become more. More patient. More confident. More trusting. More herself. The frontier had once whispered that no man could ever handle Braca. They had been right. Elias had never tried to handle her. He had never tried to control her. He had never tried to tame her. He had simply sat beside her and shown her that she didn't have to fight the entire world alone. And that was why, in the end, the orc girl who had been called too much for any man finally found the one human who understood her perfectly. Not because he was stronger than her. Not because he could control her. But because he had the courage to stand beside all of her strength. And for Braca, that was more than enough. It was home.